It was just another regular Tuesday morning at Sterling & Co., a busy advertising agency known for its fast-paced work environment and tight deadlines. The office buzzed with the sound of keyboards clicking, phones ringing, and people chatting about their weekend plans or brainstorming ideas for new campaigns. Among all this hustle and bustle sat a young woman named Maya. She had recently joined the team as a graphic designer, bringing fresh energy and creativity to the company. Maya was someone who stood out, not because she tried too hard, but because she carried herself with confidence. She wore her natural hair in a sleek twist-out that framed her face perfectly, and her style always seemed to mix professionalism with a touch of boldness. People noticed her talent right away. Her designs were sharp, innovative, and full of life, but not everyone appreciated her presence. Some coworkers felt intimidated by how unapologetically herself she was, while others simply didn't know how to react to someone so different from them. That morning, Maya was deeply focused on her work. She leaned over her desk, carefully adjusting sketches for an upcoming campaign. Her fingers moved swiftly across her tablet, adding subtle details here and there. It was a big project, and she wanted everything to be perfect. Around her, colleagues hustled back and forth, grabbing coffee or huddling in small groups to discuss deliverables. No one paid much attention to her, until two junior employees walked up behind her. These two weren't exactly friends with Maya. In fact, they rarely spoke to her unless it was absolutely necessary. They often made snide comments under their breath whenever she passed by, though they always made sure no one else heard clearly enough to call them out. This time, however, they decided to take things further. As Maya adjusted her sketches, completely unaware of what was coming, one of them suddenly poured an entire bottle of Coca-Cola over her head. The cold liquid hit her like a shockwave, soaking, her hair running down her neck and drenching her shirt and jeans. For a moment, everything froze, including Maya. The sticky sweetness of the soda dripped onto her desk, ruining papers and spilling onto her laptop keyboard. Her heart sank, and her stomach churned with humiliation. She couldn't believe what had just happened. And then came the words that made it even worse. "Maybe this'll teach you to stay in your lane," said one of the culprits with a smirk before both turned and walked away, laughing like it was some kind of joke. For a few seconds, Maya sat there motionless, trying to process what had just unfolded. Her mind raced with emotions, anger, embarrassment, disbelief, but also something else, determination. She could feel eyes on her now. Co-workers glanced in her direction, pretending to focus on their screens or papers, but secretly watching to see how she'd react. Would she cry? Yell? Run out of the room? But Maya did none of those things. Instead, she took a deep breath, wiped her hands on her already wet jeans, and slowly stood up. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was bigger than that. This wasn't the first time she'd faced disrespectful behavior at work, and she doubted it would be the last if nothing changed. So instead of letting herself fall apart, she decided to channel her frustration into action. Little did anyone know, those two thoughtless individuals were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. As Maya grabbed her bag and headed toward the HR office, whispers trailed behind her. Some people sympathized with her situation, while others dismissed it as harmless office pranks gone wrong. But Maya didn't care what they thought anymore. She was done being quiet, done letting things slide. Something inside her had snapped, not in anger but in resolve. By the end of the day, the whole office, and maybe even the world, would know exactly what had happened. And when they did, no one would see Maya the same way again. After the shocking incident, Maya didn't waste a single moment feeling sorry for herself. She knew that sitting in silence or letting her emotions get the better of her wouldn't solve anything. Instead, she decided to take control of the situation. With her soaked clothes sticking uncomfortably to her skin and her hair dripping sticky soda, she marched straight to the Human Resources office. Every step she took felt heavy. Not just because of the humiliation still lingering in her chest, but also because she wasn't sure if anyone would actually listen. When she reached HR, she knocked firmly on the door and walked in without waiting for an invitation. The HR manager looked up from his desk, clearly surprised to see her standing there in such a state. Maya didn't mince words. She explained exactly what had happened, holding nothing back. She told him how 2 junior employees had deliberately poured Coca-Cola on her, laughed about it, and even made a nasty comment before walking away. Her voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the fire behind her words. To make her case stronger, Maya mentioned that the office had security cameras installed throughout the workspace. "Check the footage," she said confidently. "You'll see everything they did." The HR manager nodded, looking uncomfortable. He promised to investigate but seemed hesitant to commit to any immediate action. To Maya, it felt like he was trying to brush the whole thing under the rug. As she left the office, frustration simmered inside her. She couldn't shake the feeling that nothing meaningful would come out of this unless she took matters into her own hands. That evening, after hours of thinking about what to do next, Maya sat down at her kitchen table with her laptop. She opened her social media account and began typing. At first, she hesitated. Sharing something so personal online felt risky. It could open her up to judgment, criticism, or even retaliation. But then she reminded herself why she needed to speak up. This wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been treated unfairly at work simply because of who they were. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she started writing. She described the incident in detail, how she'd been humiliated in front of her coworkers, how management seemed reluctant to address the issue seriously, and how this wasn't the first time she'd experienced racist behavior at the company. She included screenshots of previous messages she'd received from colleagues, filled with subtle jabs and offensive remarks disguised as jokes. By the time she finished, her post was long but powerful. It ended with a simple yet impactful statement. "Enough is enough." Before hitting send, Maya took a deep breath. She knew this was a turning point. Once she shared her story, there would be no going back. But she also knew that staying silent wouldn't protect her. It never had. With a final click, she posted it. Almost instantly, notifications began flooding in. Friends, family, and strangers alike started commenting, sharing her post and tagging others to spread awareness. Within hours, her story went viral. Hashtags like Strawberry Respect at Work and Stand with Maya started trending, and people everywhere demanded justice for what had happened. By the next morning, the buzz around Maya's post had reached Sterling & Co. employees, arrived at the office to find reporters camped outside, asking questions and snapping photos. Inside, tension hung thick in the air. Management called an emergency meeting to address the growing scandal. Everyone gathered in the conference room, murmuring nervously among themselves. Some whispered apologies to Maya when they passed her in the hallway, while others avoided eye contact altogether. The CEO stood at the front of the room, looking flustered. He tried to downplay the incident, calling it a misunderstanding and insisting it was an isolated event rather than part of a larger pattern. His tone was calm, almost rehearsed, as if he hoped to smooth things over quickly and move on. But Maya wasn't having it. She sat quietly in her chair, listening intently, waiting for her moment to speak. When the CEO paused to ask if anyone had questions, Maya raised her hand. All eyes turned to her as she stood up. For a brief second, she felt nervous, but then she remembered why she was doing this. She wasn't fighting just for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who deserved respect and fairness in the workplace. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "I'm not here to beg for justice," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I'm here to show you exactly how much power one person can have when they refuse to stay silent." With that, she pulled out her laptop and connected it to the projector. On the screen appeared a presentation titled, "Reimagining Diversity, a Blueprint for Change." For the next 10 minutes, Maya outlined specific steps the company could take to address systemic inequality. She talked about implementing mandatory diversity training programs, revising hiring practices to ensure fairness, and creating a task force led by employees from marginalized communities. She spoke passionately, using real-life examples and data to back up her points. Her confidence and preparation left everyone speechless. Even those who had initially dismissed her were nodding along, unable to deny the logic and urgency of her proposals. As Maya concluded her presentation, she revealed one last surprise: a letter signed by dozens of current and former employees supporting her demands. The room erupted into murmurs of shock and disbelief. It was clear now that this wasn't just Maya's fight, it was a movement, and the ripple effects of her courage were only beginning to unfold. By the time Maya finished her presentation, the room was completely silent. No one dared to say a word. The executives, who had entered the meeting thinking they could smooth things over with vague promises, now looked uneasy. Some scribbled notes furiously on their pads, while others avoided eye contact altogether. Even the CEO, who just moments ago had tried to downplay the incident as a minor misunderstanding, seemed shaken. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing at the projected screen where Maya's blueprint for change still hung like a challenge. Maya stood there, calm but resolute. She didn't raise her voice or try to intimidate anyone. She didn't need to. Her words had already done the work. Every slide of her presentation had been carefully thought out, backed by research and real stories from employees who had faced discrimination at Sterling & Co. She hadn't just pointed out problems. She offered solutions. Solutions that weren't radical or impossible to implement, but practical steps toward creating a workplace where everyone felt valued and respected. When she revealed the letter signed by dozens of current and former employees, the tension in the room skyrocketed. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof that Maya wasn't alone. Many people in the company had silently endured similar experiences, too afraid to speak up until now. But seeing Maya take a stand gave them courage. They added their names to the letter, lending their voices to hers. For the first time, management couldn't ignore the issue. It wasn't just one person complaining anymore. It was a collective demand for change. The CEO cleared his throat awkwardly, breaking the silence. "We appreciate your input," he began hesitantly, clearly unsure of how to respond. "These are valid concerns and we'll look into them." His tone suggested he was trying to regain control of the situation, but Maya wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. "With all due respect," she replied, her voice firm but polite. "This isn't something you can look into later. This is happening right now, today. People have trusted me enough to share their stories, and I'm trusting you to act on them. If you don't, then this conversation doesn't end here. The world is watching." Her last sentence hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew she was right. Social media was ablaze with discussions about Sterling & Co., and major clients were starting to take notice. Some had even sent emails threatening to pull their contracts unless the company addressed the allegations seriously. The stakes were higher than ever, and the pressure was mounting. As the meeting wrapped up, Maya returned to her desk, exhausted, but determined. She could feel eyes on her everywhere she went. Some colleagues approached her quietly to express support, thanking her for speaking up when they couldn't. Others kept their distance, unsure of how to react. A few shot her disapproving looks, clearly unhappy that she had stirred the pot so dramatically. But Maya didn't care what those people thought. She had made her point and she wasn't backing down. Later that afternoon, an unexpected visitor stopped by Maya's desk. It was one of the senior art directors, a woman who had always seemed distant and unapproachable. She introduced herself briefly, though Maya already knew who she was. The woman hesitated for a moment, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening before leaning in closer. "I want to apologize," she said softly, her voice tinged with guilt, "for not saying anything earlier. When I saw what happened to you, I should have stepped in. But I froze. And for that, I'm sorry." Maya blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in the woman's words. She hadn't expected an apology, especially not from someone in a leadership position. "Thank you for saying that," Maya replied after a pause. "It means a lot. But, honestly, what matters most is what happens next. Are you willing to help make things better?" The woman nodded earnestly. "Yes, absolutely. I've been where you are. Well, not exactly, but close enough. Early in my career, I faced some of the same things you're dealing with now. Back then, I chose to stay quiet because I thought it was the only way to survive. But seeing you stand up like this, it's inspiring. You're showing us that we don't have to accept things the way they are." That conversation marked the beginning of an unlikely partnership. Over the following days, Maya and the senior art director worked together to draft proposals for concrete changes within the company. They reached out to other employees, encouraging them to share their ideas and concerns. Slowly but surely, a coalition began to form. A group of people committed to holding leadership accountable and ensuring that the promised reforms actually happened. Meanwhile, outside the office, the public outcry continued to grow. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying Maya's message and shining a spotlight on workplace discrimination. Hashtags like "respect at work" trended for days, sparking conversations about equality and fairness in professional environments. Influencers and activists joined the movement, sharing Maya's post and urging companies everywhere to do better. Back at Sterling & Co., the executives scrambled to respond to the backlash. They issued a statement apologizing for the incident and promising to implement Maya's recommendations. But Maya knew apologies weren't enough. They needed action. So she kept pushing, refusing to let the momentum die down. She held follow-up meetings with HR, demanding transparency and accountability at every step. Despite the progress, the journey wasn't easy. There were moments when Maya doubted herself, wondering if she was fighting a losing battle. Some co-workers accused her of causing drama or rocking the boat unnecessarily. Others whispered behind her back, questioning her motives. But through it all, Maya stayed focused on her goal, creating a workplace where no one would ever have to endure what she had gone through. One evening, as she packed up her things to leave the office, Maya paused to reflect on everything that had happened. She thought about the day she'd walked into Sterling & Co. as a new hire, full of hope and excitement for the future. She thought about the countless microaggressions she'd brushed off, telling herself they weren't worth making a fuss over. And she thought about the moment when 2 junior employees poured Coca-Cola on her head, expecting her to shrink away in shame. But instead of shrinking, Maya had risen. She had turned humiliation into empowerment, using her voice to spark a movement that extended far beyond the walls of her office. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't the end of her fight. It was just the beginning. And whatever challenges lay ahead, Maya knew she wouldn't face them alone. She had allies now, both inside and outside the company, who believed in the same vision of equality and justice. Little did she know the biggest surprise was yet to come. The days following Maya's bold stand at Sterling & Co. were nothing short of chaotic. The company found itself under a microscope, with everyone, from employees to clients to the general public, watching closely to see what would happen next. Reporters camped outside the office building, eager to get statements from anyone willing to talk. Social media buzzed non-stop, with hashtags like "Respect at Work" and "Stand with Maya" dominating conversations. People everywhere were demanding accountability, and Sterling & Co. was scrambling to respond. Inside the office, the atmosphere was tense. Employees walked on eggshells, unsure of how to act or what to say. Some avoided eye contact with Maya, altogether, while others approached her cautiously, offering quiet words of support. A few even apologized for not speaking up sooner. It was clear that Maya's actions had shaken things up in ways no one anticipated. For years, people had accepted the toxic culture as normal, brushing off discriminatory behavior as just how things are. But now, thanks to Maya, they were forced to confront the reality of their workplace and themselves. Management, meanwhile, was in full damage control mode. The CEO held another meeting, this time addressing the entire staff. He spoke about the importance of diversity and inclusion, promising sweeping changes to improve the company's culture. He announced that an independent investigator would be brought in to review workplace practices and ensure transparency. He also revealed that the 2 junior employees responsible for the Coca-Cola incident had been fired. While some applauded these decisions, others remained skeptical. After all, promises were easy to make, but keeping them was another story altogether. Maya listened carefully during the meeting, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She appreciated the steps being taken, but she wasn't naive enough to think the fight was over. Change didn't happen overnight, especially in a place like Sterling & Co., where old habits ran deep. Still, she couldn't deny that progress was being made. More employees were coming forward with their own stories, emboldened by Maya's courage. The coalition she had started with the senior art director continued to grow, gaining momentum with each passing day. Despite the positive developments, not everyone was happy about the changes. A small group of coworkers resented Maya for causing trouble and accused her of ruining the company's reputation. They whispered behind her back, calling her divisive and self-centered. Some even went so far as to suggest she only wanted attention. These comments stung, but Maya refused to let them derail her. She knew criticism came with the territory when you stood up for what was right. Instead of focusing on the negativity, she poured her energy into the work ahead. One afternoon, as Maya sat at her desk reviewing designs for a new campaign, she received an email from the CEO. At first glance, it seemed routine, a request for feedback on upcoming initiatives, but as she read further, her eyes widened in surprise. The CEO wanted to meet with her privately later that week. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Maya agreed. When the day of the meeting arrived, Maya entered the CEO's office feeling a mix of emotions. Part of her wondered if this was just another attempt to smooth things over without making real change. But another part of her hoped it might be something more meaningful. The CEO greeted her warmly, gesturing for her to sit down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he leaned forward, his expression serious. "First, let me say thank you," he began, surprising Maya. "What you've done here, it's forced us to take a hard look at ourselves. And honestly, it's long overdue. We've failed. Not just you, but everyone who works here. I want you to know we're committed to doing better." Maya nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "I appreciate that," she said finally. "But actions speak louder than words. Promises are great, but unless we see real change, none of this matters." The CEO nodded, acknowledging her point. "You're absolutely right. That's why I'm asking for your help. We need someone like you, someone who understands the issues firsthand to guide us through this process. Someone who can hold us accountable when we fall short." Maya raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "We'd like you to join the board of directors." For a second, Maya thought she'd misheard him. Join the board? Her? A junior graphic designer who had only been with the company for a few months? It sounded almost unbelievable. The board of directors was typically reserved for top executives, people with decades of experience and impressive credentials. Yet, here was the CEO offering her a seat at the table. "I understand this is unexpected," he continued quickly, sensing her disbelief. "None of us have faced the challenges you have, and none of us can truly understand the perspective you bring. But we need that perspective if we're going to create lasting change. Will you consider it?" Maya sat there, stunned. This was the last thing she had expected. On one hand, the opportunity was incredible, a chance to influence decisions at the highest level and push for meaningful reform. On the other hand, working closely with the same leadership team that had initially dismissed her concerns felt risky. Could she trust them to follow through? Or would they use her presence on the board as a way to silence further criticism? After a long pause, Maya spoke. "This isn't about me," she said firmly. "It's about creating a workplace where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. If you're serious about making that happen, then yes, I'll do it. But I won't be a token. My voice will matter, and my input will carry weight. Are you prepared for that?" The CEO met her gaze, nodding solemnly. "Yes, absolutely." As Maya left the office, her mind raced with thoughts. Joining the board was a huge responsibility, one she hadn't anticipated when she first decided to speak out. But deep down, she knew it was the right move. This was her chance to ensure that the changes happening at Sterling and Comers weren't temporary fixes but permanent shifts toward equality and justice. Over the next few weeks, Maya prepared for her new role. She worked closely with the coalition she had formed, gathering input and ideas from employees at every level of the company. Together, they drafted detailed plans for implementing diversity training programs, revising hiring practices, and fostering a culture of inclusivity. Maya also reached out to experts in workplace equity, seeking advice on how to navigate the challenges ahead. Her first board meeting was nerve-wracking but empowering. As she took her seat among the executives, she reminded herself why she was there. She wasn't there to fit in or play politics. She was there to represent the voices of those who had been ignored for too long. When it was her turn to speak, she did so with confidence, sharing insights and recommendations that left the room buzzing with discussion. Slowly but surely, Maya began to see the impact of her efforts. New policies were introduced, training, sessions were rolled out, and employee feedback became a priority. While there was still much work to be done, the tide was turning. Sterling & Co. was starting to transform, not because of Maya alone, but because she had inspired others to join the fight. Looking back on everything that had happened, Maya realized how far she had come. From the humiliating moment when Coca-Cola was poured on her head to standing tall in the boardroom, she had proven that courage and determination could spark real change. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, she knew she wasn't walking it alone. She had allies, supporters, and a growing movement behind her, all united by the belief that respect and fairness should never be optional in any workplace. As the weeks turned into months, Maya settled into her new role on the board of directors at Sterling & Co. It wasn't easy, far from it. Every meeting felt like a balancing act, navigating between pushing for meaningful change and managing resistance from those who weren't ready to let go of the old ways. Some executives still clung to their outdated beliefs, arguing that certain reforms were unnecessary or too costly. Others paid lip service to diversity, but hesitated when it came time to make tough decisions. But Maya didn't back down. She knew this was her chance to create lasting impact, and she wasn't about to waste it. One of the biggest challenges Maya faced was earning the trust of her colleagues on the board. Many of them had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, building reputations as leaders in their field. To them, Maya was an outsider, an unexpected addition whose presence challenged the status quo. At first, they treated her with polite caution, nodding along when she spoke but rarely taking her suggestions seriously. But Maya quickly learned how to navigate the politics of the boardroom. She came prepared for every meeting, armed with data, examples, and clear plans for implementation. When someone questioned her ideas, she responded calmly but firmly, using logic and evidence to make her case. Slowly but surely, she began to earn their respect. Her partnership with the senior art director also played a crucial role in driving change. Together they formed a powerful duo, combining Maya's fresh perspective with the director's years of experience. They worked tirelessly behind the scenes, mentoring younger employees, addressing concerns, and holding leadership accountable. Their collaboration became a symbol of unity within the company, a reminder that progress was possible when people came together for a common cause. But not everyone welcomed the changes happening at Sterling & Co. A small faction of employees continued to resist, viewing Maya's efforts as a threat to their comfort zones. Some grumbled about political correctness gone mad, while others complained that the focus on diversity was distracting from the company's primary goal, making money. These voices grew louder whenever a new policy was introduced, creating tension among the staff. Maya heard the whispers and saw the eye rolls, but she refused to let negativity derail her. Instead, she doubled down on her mission, finding creative ways to engage even the skeptics. During one particularly heated town hall meeting, an employee stood up and accused Maya of prioritizing social experiments over productivity. The room fell silent, waiting to see how she would respond. Rather than getting defensive, Maya smiled gently and said, "I understand your concerns, and I want to assure you that improving our workplace culture isn't separate from achieving our goals. It's essential to them. Studies show that diverse teams are more innovative, more productive, and better at problem solving. By investing in fairness and inclusion, we're not just doing the right thing, we're setting ourselves up for long-term success. Her response earned applause from many in the room, including some who had previously doubted her. Even the skeptic who had raised the question seemed to soften, nodding thoughtfully. Moments like these reminded Maya why she had chosen to stay and fight, even when the odds felt stacked against her. Outside the office, the movement sparked by Maya's courage continued to gain momentum. Influencers, activists, and industry leaders praised her for standing up and refusing to stay silent. Articles were written about her journey, highlighting her resilience and determination. People everywhere shared their own stories of workplace discrimination, inspired by her example to speak out. What started as a single moment of humiliation had blossomed into a global conversation about equality and justice. Back at Sterling and Co., the changes began to take root. The independent investigator hired to review workplace practices submitted a detailed report, identifying areas where the company fell short and recommending specific improvements. Based on these findings, new training programs were launched to educate employees about unconscious bias, microaggressions, and allyship. Hiring practices were revamped to ensure fairness and transparency, with diverse panels involved in every stage of recruitment. Employee resource groups were established, providing safe spaces for underrepresented communities to connect and advocate for themselves. Perhaps most importantly, the company adopted a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. Anyone found guilty of harassment or prejudice faced immediate consequences, no matter their position or seniority. This sent a clear message. Sterling and Co. was serious about change, and Maya was leading the charge. Despite the progress, Maya often found herself reflecting on how far she still had to go. Late at night, after long days filled with meetings and strategy sessions, she would sit alone in her apartment, scrolling through messages of support from strangers around the world. Reading their words reminded her of why this fight mattered, not just for herself but for everyone who deserved a fair shot at success. One evening, as she prepared for another early morning at the office, Maya received an unexpected email. It was from a former colleague, a woman who had left Sterling and Co. years ago after experiencing similar mistreatment. In the email, the woman thanked Maya for giving her hope. "When I left, I thought I was the problem," she wrote. "I thought if I worked harder, kept my head down, and ignored the comments, things would get better. But they never did. Seeing you stand up and demand change has made me realize I wasn't wrong. It was the system that failed me. Thank you for fighting for all of us." Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as she read the message. For so long, she had carried the weight of this battle alone, unsure if anyone truly understood what she was trying to achieve. But now, reading words like these, she realized she wasn't alone. There were countless others who had been waiting for someone to light the spark, and she had done just that. The next day, Maya walked into the boardroom with renewed energy. She wore the same outfit she'd had on the day of the Coca-Cola incident, now cleaned and pressed, as a quiet reminder of how far she had come. As she took her seat, she glanced around the table, meeting each person's gaze. Then she spoke. "I'm not here for revenge," she said firmly, her voice steady and confident. "I'm here for revolution. Real change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without effort. We've taken important steps, but there's still work to be done. Let's keep moving forward, together." Her words resonated deeply, earning nods of agreement from the other board members. For the first time since joining the board, Maya felt like she truly belonged. She wasn't just a token or a figurehead, she was a leader, shaping the future of Sterling and Co. and paving the way for others to follow. Looking back on everything that had happened, the humiliation, the backlash, the victories big and small, Maya knew she had grown stronger. She had transformed pain into purpose, turning a moment of injustice into a catalyst for change. And while the road ahead would always have its challenges, she faced it with unwavering determination. After all, she had already proven that even in the face of cruelty, resilience and conviction could spark a movement. Months had passed since Maya first walked into the boardroom as a member of Sterling and Co.'s leadership team. The company was no longer the same place it had been when she started. Slowly but surely, her efforts, and the collective push from employees and allies, had begun to reshape its culture. Policies that once seemed impossible to change were now firmly in place. Conversations about fairness, respect, and inclusion weren't just happening behind closed doors, they were part of everyday life at the office. One morning, Maya arrived early as usual, carrying her coffee and a stack of papers filled with notes for the day's meetings. She paused for a moment outside the building, looking up at the towering glass structure that housed Sterling & Co. It felt surreal to think about how much had changed in such a short time. Not long ago, she'd been an outsider, a talented designer who often felt invisible or dismissed because of who she was. Now she was a key figure in transforming the very system that had once tried to silence her. Inside, the office buzzed with activity. Employees greeted each other warmly, chatting about weekend plans or brainstorming ideas for upcoming projects. The atmosphere was lighter, more collaborative. People seemed less afraid to speak their minds, knowing their voices would be heard without judgment. Even small gestures, like coworkers stopping by to check on one another or offering help without being asked, felt meaningful. These changes might have seemed minor to some, but to Maya they represented something profound, proof that progress was possible. Later that day, during a routine check-in with HR, Maya learned something surprising. Complaints related to workplace discrimination had dropped significantly since the new policies were implemented. Anonymous surveys showed higher levels of employee satisfaction, especially among underrepresented groups. Clients, too, had noticed the shift. Several major accounts praised Sterling & Co. for its commitment to diversity and inclusion, even going so far as to highlight the company as a model for others in the industry. It wasn't perfect, Maya knew that, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel proud of what she had accomplished. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had stood beside her, believing in the possibility of a better workplace. That afternoon, Maya attended a special ceremony hosted by the company. It was a recognition event to honor individuals and teams who had contributed to fostering a more inclusive environment. As she sat in the audience listening to speeches and watching awards being handed out, Maya couldn't help but smile. Many of the honorees were people she had worked closely with over the past months, employees who had taken initiative to lead workshops, mentor newcomers, or advocate for fairness. Seeing them celebrated reminded her of the power of community and collaboration. When it came time for the CEO to speak, he called Maya to the stage unexpectedly. At first she hesitated, unsure of what was coming next. But as she stepped forward, the room erupted into applause. Coworkers stood up, cheering loudly, clapping until their hands turned red. Some even wiped away tears, overwhelmed by the journey they had all shared. For a brief moment, Maya felt like she might cry too, but instead she smiled, letting the warmth of the moment wash over her. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "This isn't my victory, it's ours. None of this would have been possible without every single person in this room. From the employees who spoke up when it mattered most to the leaders who listened and acted, we did this together." She paused, scanning the faces of those gathered around her. "When I first joined this company, I never imagined I'd be standing here today. I didn't set out to make waves. I just wanted to do my job and be treated with respect. But sometimes, life pushes you to take a stand, to fight for something bigger than yourself. What happened to me wasn't fair, but it taught me that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to create light." Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone present. When she finished speaking, the applause returned, louder and more heartfelt than before. Maya stepped off the stage feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. She had poured her heart into this fight, and while there was still work to be done, she could finally see the fruits of her labor. In the weeks that followed, Maya continued to focus on sustainability, ensuring that the changes taking root at Sterling & Co. wouldn't fade away once the initial excitement wore off. She worked with the coalition she had formed to establish accountability measures, tracking progress and addressing any issues that arose. Regular town hall meetings gave employees a platform to voice concerns or share feedback, keeping communication open and transparent. Outside the office, Maya's story continued to inspire. Invitations poured in from organizations and conferences eager to hear her speak about resilience, leadership, and the importance of standing up for what's right. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she was ready to step into the spotlight. But after some encouragement from her colleagues, she agreed to share her journey, not as a hero but as someone who had faced adversity and refused to give up. Her talks resonated deeply with audiences, sparking conversations about equality and justice in workplaces everywhere. People approached her afterward, sharing their own stories and thanking her for giving them hope. One woman told Maya how hearing her story had inspired her to confront a toxic manager she'd feared for years. Another said Maya's courage had motivated him to start a diversity initiative at his own company. Each interaction reinforced Maya's belief that one person's actions could ripple outward, touching lives in ways they might never fully understand. As time went on, Maya found herself reflecting more and more on the lessons she had learned along the way. She realized that standing up for herself hadn't just changed her career, it had transformed her entire outlook on life. She no longer saw challenges as obstacles to fear, but as opportunities to grow. She understood the value of vulnerability, of allowing herself to lean on others when things got tough. And perhaps most importantly, she learned that true strength lies not in avoiding pain but in facing it head-on and using it to fuel positive change. Years later, when Maya looked back on her journey, she remembered the moment everything shifted. The Day 2 junior employees poured Coca-Cola on her head, thinking they could break her spirit. Instead, they had ignited a fire within her, propelling her toward a future she had never dreamed possible. She thought about the countless late nights spent strategizing, the difficult conversations she had navigated, and the relationships she had built along the way. Most of all, she thought about the people whose lives she had touched, people who now carried the torch, continuing the fight for fairness and equality in their own corners of the world. Sterling and Cubbers eventually became known not just for its advertising campaigns, but for its groundbreaking approach to workplace culture. Industry publications hailed it as a leader in diversity and inclusion, and companies around the globe looked to it as a model for transformation. Maya's name became synonymous with courage and resilience, inspiring generations of professionals to demand better for themselves and for others. But for Maya, the greatest reward wasn't fame or recognition. It was knowing that she had stayed true to herself, refusing to let anyone dim her light. She had proven that even in the face of cruelty, kindness and conviction could prevail. And in doing so, she had shown the world that real change begins with a single brave act, one that says enough is enough.